So now we're going to see the presentation. As you all know, today we are celebrating Bastille Day, but I don't know if you all know what Bastille Day actually is. So we're going to start with a small presentation of Bastille Day, and then after that, we will be having an apéro time, and we will be chatting and just having a fun time all together. As most of you know, I'm Rachel. I'm the director of Alliance Française, but we also have new participants tonight. So I wanted to introduce what we do a little bit. We do cultural activities in general throughout the year, and we also do classes for people who want to improve their French. So for tonight, we're going to be learning about Bastille Day, and after this short presentation, which will take at most half an hour, we will then talk about the French apéro, and then we will be having an apéro together. Bastille Day, so this is an important day in France, obviously, because this is the national day, and so in France, a lot of people will celebrate because the evening is finished in France. A lot of people have been celebrating with having apéro and having a party with their friend. The Bastille Day has been the national day in France since 1880, and it was made to strengthen the Third Republic originally. But before talking about the history of this day, I would like to make you participate in a short quiz to see and test your knowledge about this celebration. Julia explained to you how to use the chat earlier, and you will be able to give your answers in the chat. So you saw the chat button at the bottom of your screen. You can click on the chat icon and you can share your answers. But for now, we're going to see a couple of questions, and after you've answered those questions, we will be also obviously sharing the answers together. So are you ready? So what was the Bastille in the first place? Was it a red berry, un fruit rouge? Was it one of the king's house? Was it a jail, or was it a town? I give you a couple of seconds to think about it, but you can answer A, B, C, or D. And I want to see if everyone has answered. C, some people are saying. I'm not sure if everyone has had time to answer.
C.
Was it one of the king's house? That's not exactly the answer, but I will let more people answer first. Everyone is saying C. So yes, it was a jail. It was not one of the king's house. You were all correct with that. What happened on the 14th of July, 1790? Was it the storming of the Bastille? Was it a famous celebration? Was it a firework, or was it a revolt? What happened on the 14th of July, 1790? Be careful about the year. So some people have been saying A. I will let you have a bit more time to answer. The answer to this question was actually a famous celebration. People who answered A, you're thinking about what happened in 1789 and not in 1790. And we will be talking about this difference between those two dates later on in the presentation. Now, the French Revolution, you all know that the storming of the Bastille happened during the French Revolution. But how long did it last? Was it 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years? Do you know about that one? I give you some time to answer this. So how long did it last? It was actually 10 years. Now, we are also going to be talking about French apéro after that, and we will be talking about a cocktail which is called kir. Le kir est fait à la base de cassis et de vin blanc, mais le kir royal est fait avec, so cassis is black currant. The kir royal, if you know about it, is it made with black currant and champagne, or is it made with black currant and red wine? Is it made with strawberry and white wine, or is it made with white wine and Coca-Cola? This should be, I think, not so difficult, but I give you a bit more time to answer this question. So some people have been saying A. And this is correct. The Kir Royal is made with blackcurrant and champagne. Now, so as I was saying, we're going to be talking about Bastille Day, and we will see that two dates happened. There was the 14th of July, 1789, and there was the 14th of July, 1790, which we will be talking about a bit later. So what happened on the 14th of July, 1789? So this was the storming of the Bastille, which was in Paris. And as many of you already knew, the Bastille was a prison, was a jail. What happened during that time, the Paris population was very hungry with the king because of troops that had been gathered around the city of Paris. There was an insurrection that broke on July 14th, and the crowd had gathered near the Bastille jail because, you know, they wanted the king to remove the cannons that were pointed towards the population. And it was also an insurrection that was against the arbitrary power of the king, because, as you know, at the time, France was obviously a monarchy, and you didn't really have power to the people. You had the clergy and you had the nobility that had power, but most of the population and the middle class and the working class didn't have power for these things, because there was no rights to vote, and there was just the nobility, and you had just the clergy and the nobility that had the possibility to influence what was happening. But mostly it was the king had absolute power at the time. So the storming of the Bastille, as you can see in this famous painting, you can see the population was fighting against the army. Now, you can see also in this painting, we were showing how the Bastille got destroyed after the events that took place on the 14th. It started being destroyed by the people on the 15th of July after that, and with the city of Paris destroying it. And you had, so for the demolition of the Bastille that started the next day, you had the Paris City Hall leading it, as well as many volunteers from the people of Paris. Now, La Révolution Française, as we were talking about, it lasted for 10 years. It was not something that happened just on July 14th. And it was not something even that was happening just in July, because in fact, it had started in May 1789. It had started with the États Généraux, which is called the Estates General in English. And so that was starting in May, because, as I was saying, the king didn't want to change the voting rules. And so the people wanted to have a say, and they wanted to be able to have more power. So you had also some members of the clergy, actually, who were supporting this, and they wanted to have a more equal society, and they didn't want the absolute power of the king anymore. Mm-hmm. So the aim was the abolition of privilege and implementing the national sovereignty of the people, as well as fundamental rights and protecting individuals. Obviously, many of the emblematic events that happened during the revolution had started around that time. And for example, you all know about the Declaration of Human and Human Rights, Citizen Rights, that was in 1789. This happened actually very soon after the storming of the Bastille, because that happened in August, where the Declaration of Human Rights was written. And obviously also the current motto of the French Republic, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, was also something that appeared during this period. Now, the revolution, you were going to ask me, why did it last 10 years? What happened after 10 years? This is when Napoleon Bonaparte did the coup d'etat. We already had the republic that lasted, the first republic lasted for that time, but it ended with a coup d'etat by Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, obviously, we all know that when the French Revolution happened in 1789, this was something very new in Europe at the time. But this was not something unique in the world because the American Revolution had already happened, and also that had obviously an influence on the French Revolution. And Jefferson and other politicians also had an influence on the French Revolution at the time, because as we all know, the Constitution already existed 2 years before the French Revolution. And we all know also Lafayette was in the US, and Lafayette also had a lot to do with the Declaration of Human Rights and the French Revolution in general. Now, what about the other 14th of July, the one that happened in 1790? This one, which doesn't show in the name Bastille Day in English, but in French in Fête Nationale, this is actually a day that is also represented in this date in France, in the day that we celebrate. The one in 1790 is actually called the Fete De La Federation, which could be translated as the Federation celebration. And this was a fete that was organized during the French Revolution. This was the most famous celebration that happened during the period of the French Revolution, because after the storming of the Bastille, the National Guard was reorganized in order to pacify the insurrection and the riots, which lasted for a long time in Paris and in other places as well. So the National Guard was also created as an opposition force because, you know, you had the royal troops. So the National Guard was there for the, you know, as part of the revolution, supporting the people rather than the royal troops. So the Fête de la Fédération was organized during the anniversary of the storming of the Bastille to federate the entire army of the entire army in France and the National Guard, and to keep control over the population to stop the riots. So during that Fête de la Fédération, thousands of men marched on the Champ de Mars in Paris. You can see this represented in this painting here. Now, the 14th of July in France, this is a symbol that obviously is very important, and that it's become the national day in France as part of the Constitution in 1880. As I was telling you, 1880 is when the Third Republic started in France. So when this date was picked, this was picked obviously because of what happened with the storming of the Bastille, but it was also picked as a tribute to the Fête de la Fédération. So the Fête Nationale in France represents both dates here. And this was also a date that was picked, as you can see, it was picked nearly 100 years after the storming of the Bastille. And it was picked to remind people that when you have historical events of such an importance, and even when you have a lot of chaos and a lot of pain and a lot of fear and a lot of doubts, just as was happening during the French Revolution, people have to keep hope, because you can have major progress and you can have a better society. Because despite all the chaos and despite all the riots that happened at the time, you had new principles like the Declaration of Human Rights, you had, you know, liberté, égalité, fraternité, all these positive values that appeared because of this chaos. Even if originally, you know, at the very beginning of the revolution, all these issues happened because you had a lot of inequality and a lot of, you know, a big economic crisis in France at the time. And so, you know, despite all this chaos, you had a positive outcome afterwards. So, you know, this revolution brought the principle of freedom, equality, fraternity, and you have this painting that represents what happened. So you both see in the painting, you see the liberty, equality, fraternity, but you see also all the chaos that happened and all the negative, you know, temporarily the negative things that can happen during such a time. Now, what do we do on the 14th of July? We have a huge military march, which is on the Champs-Élysées these days. It's not on the Champ de Mars anymore, but it's on the Champs-Élysées Avenue. So this military march happens every year. You also have the feux d'artifice, the fireworks that are everywhere in France. Obviously, the biggest one is the one in Paris that's taking place near the Eiffel Tower, but it's being celebrated all over France. Normally, it's on the 14th of July itself. Sometimes it can be a bit before, depending on the towns and cities. There's also a concert that happens that's been taking place for the last few years, or maybe about a decade now, a Concert de Paris, where you also have music during this event, just before the fireworks in Paris. And also you have what we call the Bal des Pompiers, which is, a famous, so you have different public dances everywhere in France, but one of the most famous one is the Bal des Pompiers, the one organized by the firemen. Now, before we go on to the kill, I wanted to ask you all if you have any question about this. Maybe Julia, if you could unmute the microphones, please. Yeah. Anyone has questions about the 14 juillet and about how it's both about the 1789 date and the 1709 date?
So it lasted 10 years?
So it lasted about 10 years, and you had the First Republic that was the temporary one, but as I said, Jan, after you had the coup d'etat by Napoleon, which ended the Republic, and you had then the Empire with Napoleon. Okay. So despite the fact that you had the revolution, it was not something successful at establishing a republic. You had the republic for a very short time, and then you had an empire that started again. And then the Third Republic is really when the republic started in France, which was in 1880. So nearly 100 years later, really.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Happening in between. How many prisoners were freed from the Bastille when it was besieged?
So that's a very good question. I'm not sure the exact number of prisoners, but actually the Bastille was nearly empty. It was not a prison which had many prisoners in it, but it was a prison where the king could just imprison whoever he wanted to imprison. So it was very arbitrary, and that's why it was a symbol. And also it's because it was heavily fortified, as we could see on the painting. So this, the fact that it was heavily fortified, it was sticking out like a sore thumb really in the middle of Paris. And it was something that was, it was the provocation of the people having this in the middle of the city where people could be imprisoned there without any specific reason, even if they had done nothing special.
I have a question.
Yeah,
it's about the revolution. It was following by a horrible period they called the terror.
Exactly.
They decapitate many innocent people, including Robespierre. So what was this craziness with this decapitation in big mass?
Well, that's true, and this is why I was saying when the symbol was picked nearly 100 years later, it was to remind people that when you have a revolution, it's not an easy time where things are sorted out, in a month or 2 months. It's a time when you have also a lot of bad and bloody things happening. And it's oversimplifying thing to think that it's going to be fixed very quickly. And as we can see with France, it went back to the empire after that. And it's only nearly 100 years later that we had a stable republic that then lasted until the Second World War. So it's never something that we should take for granted, that peace and freedom can be maintained very easily. It's something where there's always a risk that we can lose this peace and freedom, and it's a constant work for everyone. And that's also why the storming of the Bastille represents this French Revolution and the First Republic, which then failed, and then for another century the Republic failed in France. It's just as Regina was saying, it's a reminder that you have bloody events happening, and it's not because you have a revolution happening that it's necessarily successful straight away, and it's not always just either. You can have issues, and La Terreur is obviously something that happened afterwards that lasted a long time, and where many people died, including innocent people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I see.
Yeah. Any other question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
In retrospect, I'm sure a lot of people have asked this question, but is there a consensus on why the revolution failed?
Why the revolution failed? I think it's something where, as I was saying, so, you know, during the Fete De La Federation, you had the army being unified and you had the National Guard being unified. But then you had Napoleon, who was also part of the army, and he did a coup d'etat. So you also have the question of, you know, on which side is the army? So it wasn't a king anymore, but you had someone who seized power anyway, despite the fact that, you know, a constitution had been drafted, and you know, there was already the principle of having the nobility, clergy, and the third estate, which were supposed to be sharing power, and the power was supposed to be for the citizen. But even when you have on paper a constitution that works, you can always have the army that seizes power, as we've seen in many countries throughout history, not just in France. It's happened many times since then, unfortunately.
In Russia too.
In Russia, in many places.
It's horrible.
But, you know, that's the thing. Revolutions are not always successful, and sometimes it takes a long time to, you know, then go back to democracy.
Well, they tend to destabilize the social network, social fabric. They destabilize it.
Yep. Yeah, it's you know, it's a very fragile equilibrium.
Yeah.
Any more questions about the revolution? No?
Yes.
Yes?
Could you tell us a little bit what role the philosophy of Lumière, the Enlightenment Philosophy, played in the revolution?
Sorry.
Can you tell us a little bit what the Enlightenment philosophies at the time
yes.
played in the revolutions of actually both the US and also the
Yes, sorry, we couldn't hear very well on your phone, but you're right. The philosophy at the time was very important because, so this is a bit of a complicated matter and we can't really cover that in a few minutes, but you know, the Enlightenment philosophy, you had some ideas already coming from England beforehand, and obviously many ideas developed in the US regarding the revolution and the freedom. And so you had obviously we know the founding fathers in the US had a very huge importance because Lafayette also went to the US, and you know, he had been discussing with Jefferson and with Washington and with all the founding fathers, and a lot of the ideas of freedom in the US were brought back to France. Now in France there was a difference because you also had the ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and of many other writers which were also seeing the social aspect, and you know, in French we have liberté, égalité, fraternité, and so there was also this idea of the equality being another important principle. Freedom was obviously one of the major ones, but it was, you know, freedom that should be also having a stability in terms of social rights and equality, and again also with the fraternity part, which was something coming from the siècle des Lumières and with Jean-Jacques Rousseau in particular. You could talk also about Diderot and other big philosophers of the time, but Jean-Jacques Rousseau's books were very important as well in the ideas of the revolution.
Okay, thank you.
This is something that's hard to summarize in a few minutes, but you're absolutely right that there was a lot of the philosophical ideas that had started long before the revolution. And it's not in '89 that things started. It had been already for many decades that people had been developing these ideas that led to this new Declaration of Human Rights and to the new constitution that was drafted at the time. Now, because we don't have that much time for the explaining more about the Bastille, I'm going to show you about the kir, and so the kir I'm going to explain a little bit. This is a cocktail that I'm going to make here for myself, and that is very popular for aperitif in France. So if you can, at home, if you can make it, you will probably enjoy it too. The kir is made with vin blanc, and the vin blanc is Bourgogne aligoté. Aligoté is a type of grape in France. And so the kir, the traditional one is Blanc Cassis, and it's vin blanc and Creme De Cassis, so the cream of blackcurrant. The cream of blackcurrant is something that is made in Dijon. And Gabriel Boudier is one of the makers, or I mean the traditional maker. And the Kir cocktail itself, the Blanc Cassis, was made by Félix Kir, who was born in 1876 and who died in 1968. Félix Kir was part of the Resistance, and he was also chanoine, so he was in the clergy. La Creme de Cassis Gabriel Boudier est c'est donc one of the most ancient, one of the oldest distillery in Dijon where they make Creme de Cassis. So the Creme de Cassis is so it's blackcurrant, but it's a liqueur. You know, it's an alcoholic drink with a 20% alcohol. This is something you can get easily in the US. It's just you have to look for the Gabriel Boudier one if you want one of the most traditional and one of the ones that are similar to what we actually use in France. And so for the Bourgogne aligoté, as I was saying, this is a grape that makes a really dry wine. And so for the Creme de Cassis, because it's sweet, you need to have a dry wine to go with it and to be similar to what we would make in France. If you don't have the Bourgogne aligoté, it can work as well with Chardonnay, for example, but it has to be a kind of dry wine. Now the Kir Royal, as I was saying, can be made with champagne, which is obviously from the Champagne region. And you also have a version which is called the Kir Breton, which is made with cider, because cider is the traditional drink in Brittany. So we have the Kir Breton. So you have different versions of it like that. But the Kir, the normal Kir, the one with white wine, also called Blanc Cassis, is the first one that was made. Now, what do we eat during apéro in France normally? We can have saucisson, we can have rillettes, we can have olives, a lot of finger food, basically, things that are easy to eat without being a proper meal. The apéritif, so apéro in French is the diminutive of apéritif, but when we talk about apéro in France, we don't talk just about alcoholic drinks. We talk about eating, because you know French people love eating in general, and so we often have these little biscuits, little savory cakes. We can have petit four as well. We can have cheese. It's usually going to be finger food. Apéro can be a bit similar to happy hour in English-speaking countries, but a lot of the time apéro is going to be followed by a bigger meal. So it's also what we serve to our guests before we start the party, because you know people are arriving in their own time, and so it's to keep people busy and having some chats before the dinner starts. You can have also some vegetables, dips, things like that, pâté, this kind of things. Now, before we have the apéro time, just to remind you, because some of you are new to Alliance Française, Alliance Française is a not-for-profit organization, so we organize cultural events throughout the year. Some of them are free. If you enjoy the events, you can feel free to give us a donation, and you can support us. And we also provide conversation groups, we provide classes, and if you have any question, I'm happy to answer them later on and when we're having the chat, or you can always send us an email. So this is a free event, but donations are always welcome. Now we are going to enjoy our apéro.